It's the defining dilemma of the current election season. After 8 years in office, Governor Deval Patrick remains wildly popular. But as the battle to succeed him heats up, the list of problems that can be traced back to the Patrick administration continues to grow, including the troubled healthcare connector website and deep dysfunction at the state's Department of Children and Families. Now, the Democrats running to replace Patrick have to strike an awkward balance between running on his record and running away from it. WGBH News reporter Adam Riley has the final part of this week's Focus Report.
As gubernatorial hopeful Don Berwick worked a room full of senior citizens in Brighton recently, the Democrat offered a sobering assessment of the Commonwealth.
All over the state, we've neglected transportation, bus transportation, regional transit authorities, just like we've neglected building affordable housing.
And to fix those problems, Berwick added, he's the kind of guy you want in the governor's office.
I believe I can bring to this race competence in management and leadership that's going to make things better in our state.
That sounds like a dig at Governor Deval Patrick, who's run the state for 8 years. But ask Berwick about Patrick by name and his tone shifts a lot.
Well, I work with governors all over the country when I was running Medicare and Medicaid, and I didn't see a better governor in the nation than Governor Patrick. I think he's done a remarkable job.
Among other things, Berwick lauds Patrick's focus on education and clean energy. And he's not the only candidate who pans big parts of the governor's record, but praises the governor himself.
So I am running for governor because I believe that Massachusetts can now turn this economy around for everybody. Not just Wall Street, not just people at the top, and as I've said, not just Boston and Cambridge. I want this for the whole state.
That's a damning assessment of the state economy. But when I gave Martha Coakley a chance to criticize the governor directly, she took a pass.
I would give the governor very high marks in a tough economy to make sure he kept his eye on what we needed to do, invest in innovation, infrastructure, education. How do we keep that moving? I think people feel that we are on the right track.
And then there's Steve Grossman, the third Democrat running for governor. In contrast to his opponent's sharp takes on the political status quo, Grossman is downright bullish on what Patrick has wrought.
The history of Deval Patrick's leadership will be written as one of a guy with vision who never lost faith in the people of Massachusetts, and even in the worst times, he had faith in the future and acted on it.
Not that Grossman doesn't have his own quibbles, including the troubled Health Connector website and the halting implementation of the state's medical marijuana law. But Grossman adds,
these individual moments of concern where perhaps from a leadership or administrative standpoint it didn't quite measure up, I think pale in comparison to the fact that as you look back just in the recent past, 14,000 jobs last month, 67,000 jobs in the last year.
As Grossman, Coakley, and Berwick woo the same primary voters that elected Patrick twice, it probably makes sense not to call the governor out by name. But come the general election, that delicate dance could turn off voters who want real change.
I think one problem for the Democrats is that Charlie Baker is already working on his critique of Governor Patrick, and he's pretty good at making the case that a lot of things need changing on Beacon Hill. So by the time one of these three is running against Baker in the fall, they're not going to be practiced sort of going after the problematic parts of Patrick's record the same way that Baker is. And I think that in a tight election, that could be a difference maker.
I mean, these guys want to have it both ways. They want to kind of ride the coattails of the governor's wild popularity, as
He's
you put it.
incredibly popular.
And, his charisma and the fact that people are saying in droves, we're looking at those polls today, that the state is going in the right direction.
Yeah, by huge numbers, people think that. My question is whether, if you take what Patrick has done as governor and you take away the personal charm of Patrick himself, which is considerable. I mean, he's the best explainer and interpreter of what he's done. He's so good at making the case for his vision. If you take him away and then you look at sort of the objective facts around the state, I'm not sure that those right track, wrong track numbers are going to hold up. So, when Patrick is out of the mix, assuming that he's not going around stumping, when these candidates have to justify the status quo on their own, I think it's going to be hard.
All right, we're bringing in somebody who may have a different opinion of that. Dan Payne. He's the president of the Democratic consulting firm Payne & Company, whose clients have included John Kerry, Ted Kennedy, and Barney Frank, and, of course, Deval Patrick. You were one of the very first people.
I brought him here.
I did the first interview with him. He said, I got a guy, I think you're going to like him. From day one. Right. Everybody liked him. The likability
and
factor.
then Adam wrote a piece for the Phoenix, where he was working, that I thought was a little snide. And I called him on it, and we were talking about before we went on the air. Neither of us can remember what it is he said.
Because I think a lot of other people
Snide?
thought I was totally in the tank for Governor Patrick. Because as you said, he was so compelling.
But I mean, you think his record is pretty stellar. I mean, some of these things that are put on his watch, like Annie Ducan and the
compounding
it's like,
pharmacy.
Give me a break. It's like when Martha Coakley said that wouldn't happen on her watch. She said, "How are you going to prevent some, ridiculous kind of?"
Yeah, Deval said at the time when he heard that, he said, "Well, I hope Martha Coakley's ready to ride herd on every single state employee."
Yeah, exactly.
But I think the most interesting thing, I did a little research on Deval's record. The most interesting thing I came up with is that 5 of the 7 members of the Supreme Judicial Court, the most important court in the state, are people he appointed. And let me just tick this off. He appointed the first black Chief Justice, the first openly gay justice, a woman, first Asian American justice, first black female justice, and the first Jewish Chief Justice. Now, that court will sit for years, maybe decades. So his imprint on the state through these justices is considerable.
Well, but what else? I mean, then some people look at that and said, "Well, that's liberalism run amok." That's him being Mr. Diversity and.
But he did very specific things that, in some cases, he reversed what Romney had done. The stem cell research thing, he immediately rescinded the ban on that. He put $1 billion into a biotech initiative. 1 in 4 jobs top jobs in the state government is held now by a minority. That's significant, and that's going to last a while.
But do you think that's the sort of thing that, that when that big mass of voters in the middle, independents, maybe Democrats, who could go either way, when they go to the polls in the general, will they appreciate that stuff?
It depends on what the Democrat says on behalf of Deval, because part of the job for, let's assume, Martha Coakley is going to be to defend Deval Patrick. And Deval himself, he's a very resourceful candidate. People don't know that Deval made a living before he ran giving speeches around the country. So he knows how to turn on an audience. I mean, he's really good at that, any size. And next to him, all the other candidates sound like a Miss America contestant. They just seem halting and crazy.
It's interesting. You picked up on Don Berwick. I mean, he makes some criticisms when he's speaking to a crowd, but then he fails to take the governor on, and yet. The one big area, as you pointed out, is they differ, just right down the middle on this whole thing about casino gambling. And he could take that on and say, this is going to be the downfall. Look at what's happening in Atlantic City. Look what's happening in New Jersey. Look what's happening in Rhode Island. And he hasn't taken the government on. You
kind of wonder what his campaign might look like today if he had made that choice. The polls that we've seen lately indicate that probably the casino law is not going to be repealed if the current numbers hold up. That being said, if Berwick had found some way, although, as I talk this through, I don't know how much more aggressive he could have been, because he really makes a compelling case. This is going to be a corrosive force in Massachusetts. We can't do this. Short of saying, I'd like to say Governor Deval Patrick did a good job, but I can't give high marks to someone who shepherded this law through. I don't know what more he could have done. But you're right, it's a huge area of difference, and yet when Berwick sizes up the job the governor's done, it's almost like he kind of brackets it and puts it to the side.
It's interesting, this whole thing about the state going on the right track, Dan, because obviously a lot of those things that you mentioned, and I think there's a great deal of pride. And it was very specific, though. It was largely relegated to the urban areas, Boston, Cambridge, some of the big centers, and the further out west you get, the less. But
although very far west,
I know
Deval is very popular.
Exactly, and for the same reason. I think there's pride in this state that you don't find elsewhere. Is that attributable to Governor Patrick, or is it because we are the innovation center?
No, I think Deval, the governor, I should say, does a good job at letting people know how things are doing. His job performance may not be as high in polling as his personal popularity, but he has convinced the state that we're doing very well here, and he has some data to back it up on education, on the environment, on energy. There are things that are happening in this state that aren't happening elsewhere.
It makes us feel good about ourselves. Governor feels good.
Well,
we like him.
He ran twice on the idea of hope and optimism.
And the state is a part of his life story.
Yeah, it's true. All right, Dan Payne, always a pleasure to have you here. Adam Riley, thanks so much.